Here's the story from the Daily Beast. Andrew Schulz predicts landslide Trump win after podcast appearance. Well, I know many of you're saying, like, well, who is this guy? He's just some comedian. What does he matter? He matters substantially more than like all the pollsters and pundits. Sorry, that's true. Now, I will admit, Andrew Schulz may be the first guy to say something like, yo, I'm just a comedian on a podcast. I don't know what I'm talking about. So he does an interview with Donald Trump. And then he says that he starts getting these looks. He's saying it's not close anymore. Before he came on, I was like, he ain't got no chance. He's coming on here. He's got to be down bad. Then he says in a newly posted recap, afterwards, since the interview uploaded, he's gotten to peek into just how many people still support Trump. It was the looks on the street. It was like, you know, when someone who's trying to sell you drugs, they give you this nod, he explained. That's all I've been getting for the last week. I think there are a lot of secret Trump voters. And the reason why I think this story actually matters more than pundits, podcasters. Look, we're obviously in support of Donald Trump, critical of Kamala Harris. The Democrats are clearly critical of Trump, supporting Kamala Harris. So most people assume, yeah, of course, the people on the right are going to say, I think Trump's going to win. The people on the left are saying Kamala's going to win. When you look at the pundits and the pollsters, they're weighted. The pollsters are always biased in favor. They're usually biased in favor of Democrats, and pundits are going to go in the same direction. So I actually think it's important to look to normies, because this is who Trump and Kamala are trying to convince. Andrew Schulz, funny guy, not overtly political, interviews Donald Trump. It's kind of a funny show. And afterwards, he says the reaction was massively positive. What we would have expected in the culture war was that somebody would be like, oh, I can't interview Trump because it's going to be the end of my career. Now it's, wow, people are giving me nods on the street. It is inverted from where we were oh so long ago. You combine this with the failure of the Fox News interview that Kamala Harris had, and the current poly market showing Donald Trump is up in the betting odds about 23 points. In aggregate, it's up like 16 or 17% on Real Clear Politics. And I think it's fair to say regular people ignore the noise, ignore the pundits. Regular people outright are saying it's a Donald Trump victory. Now, I know immediately everyone's going to be like, you better get out and vote and don't assume Donald Trump's going to win. But I'm curious if you guys agree on that assessment.
Well, I think it was very interesting. There was a long profile piece in The Guardian today talking about how this sentiment, I think, is shared not just among the comedians of the world, but a lot of Democrat, state, and local officials have been already sort of creating and drafting contingency plans should President Trump win. They're melting down that mass deportations may materialize, along with a lot of his other policies, and it's sort of a more fleshed out version of what people may know that was the Transition Integrity Project back in 2020, where they were focused on trying to make sure that President Trump couldn't win. But now they're more focused on what would happen if he did win. So I think there's a significant tell there. And of course, the Axios scoop that broke last week showing that a lot of House Democrats are already sort of gossiping behind the scenes, saying that they may refuse to certify election results.
That was fascinating.
Right, with Jamie Raskin being the top quote.
He said it. Raskin said in February, we will not certify a Trump victory.
Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of movement, I think, coming from the GOP, the RNC, so state level GOPs, and then the RNC coming to try to prevent election fraud, which we're obviously all very critical of. But there's a lot of interesting, I think, developments on the front, particularly of the overseas vote. Mainstream media is melting down that GOP, RNC committee members are suing over that. But I do think it is concerning to me that absentee ballot return rates in Detroit and Flint hitting 40 and 39% respectively. I think there's a new report out from the Government Accountability Institute saying that over 53 counties in Michigan have more registered voters than they do citizens. So the more that
that's crazy.
Yeah, and the government
does that work?
Peter Schweitzer's a great journalist. So I think when you see numbers like that, you know, it sort of comes back to the question of, you know, I wish it were a fair election, but it's more, I always call it ballot warfare than it is a free and fair vote.
That's a really good way of putting it, ballot warfare. I said this on the show. Yeah, I said that exact thing on the show yesterday, actually. I called it ballot warfare.
Yeah, she actually stole your quote.
No. I did a ballot warfare special edition of War Room many months ago.
I'm totally messing with you. I stole that from you. But at least I didn't steal an election, right? So what I was saying yesterday was, even if it looks like Trump is ahead, we got to get out there and we got to vote. Like every illegal alien is voting, like they're harvesting ballots, right? We need to just prepare for the absolute worst case scenario. It's got to be too big to rig. It's got to be too big to rig.
Well, that's the most fascinating thing about this election, and that's what I've been talking to a lot of people about, is no one hasn't made up their mind who they like better. You know, maybe there's like 5 people in the entire country who are like, oh, I don't know, Kamala, Trump, I don't know. Which one would it be? So the entire effort is about getting people out to vote for your guy. That's what's been so amazing about like what Charlie Kirk is doing with Turning Point Action. Have you seen some of the footage of him going to these universities? He had like a 22
they're amazing.
stop tour of universities this fall, colleges and universities. And if you'd been following his work, like the past couple of years, he goes out and there's a ton of protesters. Now he goes out and he convinces kids that they want to vote for Trump, and then they throw MAGA hats at everybody, and everyone's cheering for Trump.
That's right.
The
And
video,
they're like, wait, I want to buy a house. I don't want illegal immigrants taking my job.
to your point, exactly that. You used to see these big protests when they would do these college events. Now it's mostly young guys going like Trump, and there's a very few dissidents arguing with him, and they're not very good at arguing with him.
They try, but they can't actually maintain a point because they don't have enough information.
But look, following the Kamala Harris bomb of an interview on Fox News, which no sane person thinks she did well. I mean, that's there. I'm sorry. Anybody who says she did well, Mark Cuban is lying.
I don't get it. What is going on with him?
The thing is, like, you could say, like, if you were pro Kamala, you could say that Brett Baier was harassing her. We were
but
joking.
he so wasn't.
I don't agree with it, but
You can't
we
even-
were joking about it before the show. That's what people are saying. People are like, "Oh, he was in her face and he was rude and
Yes,
all
yes.
of this stuff," and
But
she
you-
came off
But you
right
said
after
you
the
could
interview.
say that.
You could
can't.
say that.
You can't say that.
People have been
it is-
saying it's a victory for
No,
her.
of course they are, but there's no basis for saying that. Brett Baier's first question was, how many illegal immigrants do you think your administration has released into this country since it began? That's a straightforward, basic question. None of these are gotchas, and I'll explain. A gotcha is when, if Brett Baier said, You've said that Donald Trump is unstable. And she goes, yes, he is. Do you think that if a president is showing these behaviors of instability or mental decline, the 25th Amendment should be invoked to remove them? And she goes, absolutely. And then he goes, like Joe Biden, when you noticed he was in mental decline. Why didn't you? That's how you gotcha. He didn't do any of that.
No, that's
He didn't do
I
none of it.
agree with you on that because that was
her record sucks.
Yeah, her
Exactly.
record sucks, so it's a gotcha. But like,
It's
I
not a
agree with you
gotcha.
on that because I really wanted him to press her not on the questions that he wanted to ask, but on the answers she was giving.
Right.
Like when he said, you know, what would you turn the page on? And she basically said rhetoric and mean tweets.
Which is hilarious.
It's like, how about you press on that, Brett? Like, what is she talking about? What last 10 years? She's been in office for 3.5. Trump's been out of office. She's complaining that he's been running this whole time. But that's because Biden and Kamala Harris suck. You know what I mean? Like, press her on her answers. And instead, he was really married to what he wanted to ask instead of what she was saying.
I think that's totally fair. I think he also probably knew that he wasn't going to have that much time with her, and so
Well,
he
that's what
wanted to get
everybody
to
thinks, too.
a number of different questions. There were a few issues, but overall, I think he did a pretty good job. Again, I also would have appreciated it if he pressed her more, but it's easy for me to Monday morning quarterback him when he was sitting across from the vice president.
I don't
I
think
will
so.
say
I
this.
mean, you
Well-
do interviews. You know how to do an interview.
I've never interviewed Kamala Harris.
No, but
I
I
don't
think
think
you
I could
could.
talk to
I
her.
think
My
you'd do a better
ears
job.
would be like Trump's ears. They'd be covered in bandages after I spoke to that woman for a half hour.
Well, she is
But,
hard to listen to.
Yeah, she's very hard to listen
think
to.
Brett,
I just want to make this one point about the interview. One of the issues is that Kamala, she hasn't figured out how to brand herself. They're going back and forth between the adults are back in charge and I'm anti-establishment and I'm going to change things. Biden was really clearly the establishment candidate. He was proud of that. They discussed him in those terms. She's trying to discuss this as if she's an anti-establishment candidate, but she's from the current administration. And one final note I'll add is all the people who are saying she looked good in this interview think that men can get pregnant. So their
Right. No,
opinions
that's
don't really
for
matter.
sure.
They're not in
That's for
contact
sure.
with
Yeah,
reality.
but
All that
that's
matters
what
is
we're
the agenda.
dealing with.
The counter
That's what we're dealing with.
from MSNBC was that Brett was, or people were saying that Kamala looked angry. They're saying it was because Americans can't handle a strong black woman because, of course, that was their initial commentary after.
also, we're all
it aired.
sexist, Natalie.
And
You forgot
well, of
that
course,
part.
but you know they're desperate. They also wheeled out Rachel Maddow last night to drop another, as she described, bombshell drop on President Trump having to do with trying to negotiate. I think it was like $20,000 off of Stormy Daniels' legal bills in exchange for an NDA. That was their big scoop. But I will say it is interesting.
Well, that convinced me.
right? I know.
And I think Kamala did win that debate now.
Yeah, it is interesting to me though if you read the Jack Smith filing, and I think sort of the big narrative on how they are setting up, or at least kind of making us think that President Trump is going to steal the 2024 election. this concept of a red mirage, right, turning into a blue wave. They say that a lot of the way, again, this is like MSNBC talking, but that President Trump is trying to create the illusion of success is that, oh, we're surging in the polls, we're doing so well, which I do think is accurate and true. But it is funny to me when I see left-wing media outlets carry that narrative, because they're sort of in some ways helping the Trump campaign from their perspective of being able to give the Trump campaign ground to say that if there is a red mirage, right, where they're ahead on election night, but then it flips because of the, mass amounts of mail-in ballots that always seem to cut one way with a weird statistical anomaly only for Democrats. That's why, to me, I get weirded out when I see, like, for instance, Politico yesterday running that long profile piece about how the Harris campaign is in shambles in Pennsylvania, because I don't think Democrats typically project weakness, especially in the context of leaning into Trump's abilities to, as they would say, claim election fraud.
I think Kamala Harris even going for this Fox News interview speaks to the flailing of the campaign. I think this is a desperate attempt by some in the Kamala Harris campaign to reach out to Republicans, but I don't think this is an effective way of doing it. She also held a rally on this same day in Pennsylvania where she had many former Republican congressmen come and endorse her. It was including Adam Kinzinger, Lauren Comstock, former Republicans. But I don't think this is going to be effective for her campaign at all with this Republican outreach. As far as the spin that we're seeing from the left with this Bret Baier interview, I'm reading a headline from the New York Times. It says, Kamala Harris arrived for a Fox interview. She got a debate. That has to be the spin. But from any other perspective, any interview that Donald Trump sits down for is at least this antagonistic, and he would get the interviewee would get praised for being so harsh on Trump.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.